So the topic of discussion would be best practices to avoid incidents at sea. And for this, I'd like to invite our moderator, Mr. Terence Ho, Executive Director of the Singapore Sailing Federation, on stage. Mr. Ho, please.
Hello everyone, a very good morning to each and every one of you. Thank you for investing your very precious Monday morning with us. We hope to make this a very fruitful session for each and every one of you. Just show of hands, who's alive this morning? Come on. Yes, great. Yep, a few of you are alive. Thank you very much for responding. Great to see all of you. So, how many of you here have witnessed firsthand a accident or near miss at sea? Right? Come on, higher. Yep. Most of you. And how many of you then at that point in time have wished that more could be done for safety at sea? What could the regulators have done? What could the police have done? What could the association have done? What could the schools have done? And that's why we are here today. We are here to have this panel discussion, and we're fortunate enough for the organizers to allow the Pleasure Craft Safety Work Group to kick off this very important Safety at Sea Week. Yep. So I hope today's discussions or later will give you new perspectives, new strategies as you go about your boating business, either professionally or personally, to make boating safety part of your culture, part of your ethos, part of your life. Okay, so has everyone keyed in their questions into the system? I'm sure, otherwise it'll be a very short session. No? If you guys don't have many questions, I mean, I'm smart, but I'm not that smart, right? So I'm going to only have a couple, but if you guys don't contribute, then it's an opportunity missed. So I think it's now time for me to just invite my panel back on stage. You've heard from them, so I'd like to re-invite Captain Richard Howe and Captain William Francis back onto the stage to take your seats, please. Gentlemen. Next on stage, I'd like to invite someone that, if you have a PPCDL, I hope most of you have, you'll be very familiar with him and his team of invigilators who are the gatekeeper of our PPCDL. I'd like to invite Senior Lecturer at the Singapore Maritime Academy, Captain Sawan Osman, onto the stage, please. Captain Sawan. Our next panelist leads a team of people that you hope not to meet at sea, right? Those of you who have been fishing a little bit too close to Jurong Island, to Pulau Sebarok, a bit too close to Pulau Bukom, you may have met his men in red, white, and blue, right? Please welcome on stage Police Superintendent Desmond Ong, Commanding Officer, Brani Region, Police Coast Guard. And of course, life at sea without this group of people would be lawless. And so I'd like you guys to welcome Captain Sean Ho up on stage, Assistant Director for Marine Safety and the Environment and Deputy Port Master, Maritime Port Authority. Captain Sean, please. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So, very big awkward. I guess it just leads me to, I'll let everyone introduce themselves a little bit. Gentlemen, you have a microphone next to you. Just a little bit about your experience and why basically you're here this morning. So maybe we'll start with Captain Sean, please.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean, and I'm the head of department for the Marine Environment and Safety Department in MPA. I'm also concurrently the Deputy Port Master. So my team work very closely with the pleasure craft industry. We carry out audits for the PPCDL training centers. We investigate incidents at sea, especially pleasure craft related incidents. And during COVID time, we also work closely with pleasure craft agent operators with regards to crew change or SMM measures. So my team work closely with the pleasure craft industry. Happy to be here to address any safety related issues today. Thank you.
Yeah, morning everyone. I'm Desmond from the Police Coast Guard. So I'm the commanding officer of the Brani region. So we are responsible for the southeastern waters of Singapore, from Changi all the way to Labrador. So I think from police perspective, we work very closely with the maritime port authorities for all maritime related matters. And in fact, we are also trying to actively engage some of the associations, like for example, the Boating Association, the Sailing Federation, when there are activities. So we'll work closely with them to look at, for example, what will be some of the safety concerns that police need to be aware of. For us, we are also responding to all maritime incidents. I think, as earlier mentioned by Mr. Terence, you hope not to meet my guys. We are basically there to enforce law and order, but at the same time, being part of the maritime community out there. So we are also responding to any vessels in distress, vessels in need of assistance. So we partner very closely with MPA in such areas. So very thankful to be invited here today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Captain Shawan. I'm a senior lecturer with Singapore Maritime Academy. I'm also the course chair of Diploma in Nautical Studies. My background, of course, is the master mariner, sailing on different type of ships, and I've been a dock master with Raffles Marina manager with SAF Yacht Club before I joined Singapore Polytechnic, Singapore Maritime Academy. One of my other responsibility is in charge of PPCDL examination on behalf of MPA. So I look into PPCDL exam matters, and we also, from time to time, we study the statistic given by MPA, and we try to close the gap during the assessment, especially during the practical examination. Yeah. So I can see some of the candidates that have passed or have failed before in the audience. Okay, see you later. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone for that good introduction. I think it's a segue and it's a good starting point. Captain Sawan mentioned something about hearing about the incidents that happen at sea and then trying to bridge that knowledge gap. And as I understand it from the MPA, the most common incident or pleasure craft incident at sea, can anyone guess what it is? What's the most common accident at sea when it comes to pleasure craft? Collisions? Anyone else? Sorry, Roy? Grounding, Ariel, thank you. Anyone else? Fire? Okay, so yeah, great. All those happens, but unfortunately, the most common is actually grounding. Yeah, I hope none of you here have personally experienced it. But maybe I'd like to ask this to the panel. What do you think, in your own perspective, your own experience, what do you think would be one or couple great measures to avoid a grounding, or general advice you can give? Richard, you'd like to start as well? I think it's on. It's on. Yeah, just speak. Yeah.
Hello? Yes. The common cause of grounding is lack of attention. There can be other reasons, but lack of attention is the main thing. And if you are not keeping an eye on your navigation, you are liable to run aground. One of the other things can be a major distraction. And the only time that I've run aground was when there was a youngster, a 7-year-old lass was, I saw her, I was steering from down below, and I saw this young lass with a leg hooked around one of the stanchions, and she was trying to touch the water from the bow wave. And all I could see was one leg there and holding on, and I just pulled both of my throttles back to neutral, and went rocketing out to go and grab her before she went under, because she could have gone back and hit the propellers. But unfortunately, I only pulled one of them not to neutral. I went round there to drag her out, and I was actually fairly close to the point which I was going around, and whilst I was pulling her up, we ran aground. So you can be distracted, and I certainly was, and I learned from that. Even at my ripe old age of about 75 at the time, I still learned that you can be distracted. So that's the main thing I've got to say.
Thank you. Yep, William?
The difference between a merchant ship and a pleasure craft is this. Merchant ships avoid reefs, shoals, shallow areas. They've got deep drafts. Pleasure crafts, recreational crafts, we get attracted by shoals, reefs, and shallow areas. And sometimes we beach, which you're not supposed to. As a pleasure craft owner, there are two things that you must have. You gotta spend the money on these two things. You gotta get yourself a chart plotter. Not just a GPS, but a chart plotter, and one that works. Anyway, they last a long time. The second thing that you must have on your boat is a fish finder or an echo sounder. Comes quite cheap nowadays. So with these two tools, it should keep you fairly safe. Now, the shocking thing is this. I've seen really small boats get grounded, and you won't believe how small these boats are. They're known as PWCs or jet skis. So the story goes like this. So this is a friend of mine. He's on board a jet ski. He likes to go fast, and I'm glad he's enjoying the sea. And he says, William, I just cannot understand it. Yesterday, I passed through this stretch of water. I was perfectly fine. Today, same time, I passed through this stretch of water. I got grounded. How come? And I tell him, tides. The range of tides in Singapore that rise and fall, on the average, is about 3 meters. So the third thing that you need to look out for, and you can use your handphone app for this one, is check the tides. At low tides, some reefs in Singapore waters are exposed. Thank you.
Okay, although Captain William encouraged us to use apps and technology, but I would like to give a caution that over-reliance on equipment can also lead to grounding if the equipment fails, right? So you have to verify the fact or the information that is provided by your equipment before you 100% relying on that equipment. So you have to do cross-check. For example, if you have a GPS position, it's better to cross-check with bearings and all that so that you know your GPS is working well. Likewise for the tide, it's always good to have a tide table on board so that you can verify your equipment whether it's giving the correct reading and that you know that it's reliable. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess they have covered quite a fair bit. I think for those who are operating in Singapore, one thing that we need to be very aware of is that in Singapore, our waters are constantly changing. I mean, there's a lot of reclamation works going on. I think as pleasure craft community, aside from relying on technology or charts, I think you need to be aware of works that are happening almost day by day. An area that you traversed 1 week ago or even a month ago will be very different a month later if the area concerned is being reclaimed. I think in Singapore's context, this is something that is very common. It's going to be happening quite rampantly. I think for those who are in the East Coast will be aware that they are going to be extending our shorelines outwards under the URA plan. So I think as part of the community, you need to rely on all the port marine circulars that is available online. In fact, you don't need to subscribe to a hard copy. You just go onto your mobile app, go on MPA app, and you can read up on all these advisories and keep well clear of these shallows. And that will save you from grounding. Thanks.
Hi. For MPA's perspective with regards to responding to incidents involving pleasure craft, yes, grounding we see the largest number of incidents involving pleasure craft to be grounding, and on average, we see around 4 or 5 grounding incidents in Singapore. For me, I think the biggest issue is with regard to local knowledge of the master. I think some has been brought up already. I just want to elaborate a bit more on local knowledge. You learn that in PPCDL, but once you go out into sea, it's important that you know where you are. Yes, you use chart plotter, like Captain Sawan has mentioned. It's also important to visually identify important landmarks, buoys, beacon, in addition to the use of electronic aids. Particularly for grounding incidents, we see that it happens more often in areas like Siren Reef, and also the northeastern area between Changi, Tekong, and Ubin. So my advice to the boaters is that when you go out to sea, do a proper passage planning, know where you are going, be familiar with the tides. Once you are there, do constant plotting so that you know where you are and you keep away from shallow waters to avoid grounding. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. Actually, let me just try to see that this works. If I press active, does it go on the... Okay. I think if you guys look at your apps, you would see that one common question that everybody's asking, and it's actually quite related to what we're talking about. Right now, the PPCDL is valid for life, right? Once you get it. So the question from the floor is there any thinking, or should we yeah, here we go. Yeah. How often should boaters, if at all, be refreshed in their basic safety principles, in their boating skills, in their boating knowledge? I guess if it's a common question from the floor, some of you think that there should be, or there is some merit, that it could be maybe a yearly test, right? No. But what is the panel thing? Anyone? If at all, or should we, or is there a better way to do this, to keep people aware, people on their toes, people current? Someone? Yep.
For those who have attend the PPCDL and they have no boat of their own, so the knowledge would deteriorate over time. Yeah, but there are chartering companies that before they are allowed to charter the boats, they are required to go through some kind of revalidation before they are allowed to drive the boat that they intend to charter. Yeah. For boat owners, I guess over time, with their experience, they will have more knowledge, and most of the boats are berthed at marinas, and marinas and yacht club usually would conduct some flotilla sail together, so they learn from the marina personnel. Right? For example, when I was at Raffles Marina, I lead a flotilla to Anambas, to Phuket and all that. So those boaters would have learned from by following such flotilla. They do passage planning, and they know how to avoid danger area, because we do briefing before we embark on the flotilla. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard.
With regards to ships, when I was at sea, you had to show what you had been doing, and if you were actively engaged on ships at sea, then you did not, weren't being re-examined. But if you came ashore, then if you wanted to go back to sea again, you had to do a renewal of your certificate, which was not the same as sitting the whole exam again, but it was, you had to show that you're up to date. And I do believe that if someone who has got their PPL license and does not do any boating at all, they should have a refresher. I think the refresher should be on a practical side, possibly even having to redo the actual practical test to show that they could manoeuvre a boat, but not to have to do things like remember all the light sequences of places in Singapore and saying, what's such and such light characteristics, which I do believe is being asked now. And I think that, frankly, is pretty stupid, because they forget them that 1 week after they've finished their exam, they've forgotten all about these lights. But they'll spend ages learning them for the exam and they forget it. So I think that it's a very good thing to have a re-examination, but for people that cannot prove that they've been actively using their license. Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe just one more response before we move on.
Your final response. The best way to learn how to do something is to do that something you're trying to learn. This is especially true when it comes to pleasure boating, recreational boating. Now, if you're a new boater and you passed your PPCL many years ago, obviously you'll be a little rusty, but at least you had the one-time experience to study in a classroom environment, to go out in a Dynaglass 20DX, and to get your PPCL at least once. Could be many years ago, but at least once. That one-time experience will at least set you on the right path to knowing what you don't know and what you have to. From my perspective, the best way to get yourself on board boating again, if you hadn't been boating for a long time, or haven't even started in the first place because you couldn't afford to buy a boat, is to get an experienced boater along with you the first time you go out to sea. Pleasure crafts come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Let's just say that you start off with a small boat, 26-footer, center console, single engine. Now, there's so many things to learn, right? Just now I went through first principles. Maintenance, knowledge will be zero. Lookout, you can do. Driving the boat, navigation, knowing where you are, where you're going, learning local knowledge, that takes some time. Now, the fastest way to learn really is apprenticeship. Get a friend, a seasoned guy, get him to go with you. Only go out during the daytime, sunrise to sunset, for the time being. Once you get your seaman legs, once you understand the common sense of operating the boat, you'll be a safer boater for sure. And then you have to grow from confidence to confidence by going out to sea again and again and again until that knowledge is set in your head, until you develop the basic skills and understand the dangers. But right at the very beginning, I would suggest that you get a friend, which is what I think most boaters do, and get him to show you the ropes.
Thank you, William. I guess in summary, I'm glad no one has said we need more regulation. We need more rules. We need to tell people that your license expires unless you attend a class. I think in the spirit of seamanship, right, it's a lot of self-awareness. You need to know what you don't know, right? I know it sounds funny, right? You need to know what you don't know, but unfortunately, that has to be the way that we prescribe or share that lesson with all our friends in our communities, in our own circles of influence. We need to tell our friends, if you haven't touched a helm in a couple of months, couple of years, I think you need to go out with someone else, right? That's, I think, the healthy way, and that's a more sustainable way of moving forward rather than making it a compulsory refresher course. So thank you. And I mean, that also links to the next question. The power boaters, sailors are not the only ones using the water space, right? We've got kayakers, we've got SUP users, windfall boards, open water swimmers, and divers. Are there any suggestions how we can get them involved in this forum as well? I think everyone here, anybody here open water swimmer? No, yeah. So everyone here is a pleasure craft user. Is there a great suggestion of how we can get more of them involved, all the C space users involved, to come for these forums or to listen, to chime in, and to understand that it takes two hands to be safe at sea? Yes.
I think the way to get people listening and learning is to do it in an enjoyable fashion. For instance, to have the yacht clubs have an evening where maybe there might be a barbecue or something like that. And then they say, right, all our members and anybody else likes to come along. It'll cost you for the barbecue. But we will have a couple of speakers that will be talking practical, experienced people, having a talk and giving them a few hints about various things and what's gone wrong and what to look after. And if people enjoy going there and seeing their mates and having a nice evening, but also having I won't say a lecture, but a talk about some of these matters of safety or things to do or things that have changed in Singapore and to look after, then that might educate a lot of people in a nice way.
Yes, great suggestion. Oh, Sean.
Hi. These are the craft that are non-powered. So they normally operate closer to shore, but to get them on board in regard to safety at sea, MPA does that when we engage them, especially at perhaps the association level, any sea sports related association level, or even at the schools level, we engage them when they say they apply for permits to carry out activity at sea. So this is when we engage them, definitely just to make sure that they are aware, again, about local knowledge, safety. Especially we will share with them information with regards to movements of vessels in port, how they conduct activities safely at sea. On the MPA side, we also published a few years back. We also published a booklet on, I believe, the small craft guidebook. So that contains information for persons doing recreational sea sports activity as well. For perhaps kayakers, canoeists, we have also published information on guidelines on how to stay safe when they are doing kayaking and canoeing activities while at sea.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you for those suggestions. I mean, reaching out to the associations, to the federations, making it fun and enjoyable. I think that's great. I run a federation myself. That just, I have just had to look back, and actually I haven't planned any such talks for my own federation. So that will definitely happen in my next work year. So thanks for that suggestion. Just now, Richard also alluded to the fact that there are regulations that apply to the IMO, and that's well regulated. But maybe someone has asked, does the panel see a lax attitude in the industry when it comes to managing and operating their own craft? So and it's related to this. To become a charter boat captain, the hurdle is not really high, right? Unfortunately, there are varying qualities, varying experiences, varying standards about how we choose our charter boat captains. What does the panel think about a way ahead that we can, have a sort of bridge? Of course, the IMO regulations are all the way up there, but is there a bridge that we can use for owners, operators, crew of SZH boats, particularly in Singapore? Yes, Sawan, thank you.
Okay, pertaining to the regulations, our local MPA regulation actually adopt the regulations from IMO, International Collision Regulations or Rule of the Road. Of course, for PPCDL, we do not require them to memorize the 38 or 40 rules by heart, but we do from the point of assessment. There are important critical rules, for example, risk assessment, collision assessment, risk of collision assessment, Rule 7. We emphasize that during the examination. That is very important. So if a person has gone through the PPCDL training and then finally passed the PPCDL assessment, they would have already attained a certain competency. And if they are captain of chartering companies, and I understand there are chartering companies, they have their own standards when they go about employing people to be the master of their fleet of charter boats. So these are layers of controls that we have that ensure that the person who drives the pleasure craft has a certain competency. For the attitude, we can't control human attitude. It depends on the person background, the person after he passed, we can't ensure whether he really follow and all that. So, but the regulations that we adopt is already quite sufficient from my point of view for PPCDL. And in addition to that, we also introduced, MPA introduced advanced PPCDL. So for those who are required to operate a boat more than 24 meters, they have to go through another training, higher level training, and they go through another assessment before they are able to operate that kind of size of boat. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there standards that we should impose before someone becomes a charter boat captain, for example? Yeah, short of IMO regulations, of course, but yeah.
As a fellow boater, I believe in our boating community actually, and I rather self-regulate than have an authority regulate us. This is what I observe when it comes to boating, pleasure boating in Singapore. Number one, we are already congregated into communities. Before the marinas were formed, boating was a kind of loose thing. Either you're in the West Coast area or you're up in Punggol, and then the fishing fleet will be at Marine Parade area off the East Coast. But today, boaters are congregated into specific communities which we call marinas. There are 7 marinas in Singapore, if I include Changi Sailing Club. And within each marina, they have their own community, they have their own peer pressure, and so on and so forth. They know what's happening. Now, it's very unfortunate that when it comes to Singapore, we've got so many boats, and it's growing, the population. I know the waiting period to put your boat in 1 degree 15, it's about 2 years, right? To put your boat in the water. So the population of boats have grown. Population of boaters have definitely grown over the last 23 years, and that's a very good thing. And the other wonderful thing, like I said, is that we already congregated into communities. So I believe in peer pressure within the community, and to get that particular community, that marina or sailing club, to actually use soft persuasion and education to make sure that our boaters behave themselves and observe good seamanship and boating etiquette when they're out at sea. I guess the issue with Singapore is this, there's not many places that you can go to. So if you're from Keppel or 1 degree 15, most of the boats on the weekend will congregate off Lazarus, and that's where incidences or things happen, where you've got to share that limited, very, very limited sea space with the charter boat fleet that like to launch and play with their tow toys. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I think they should do that. But they've got to compete with anglers. I think there's some people dive there also. Plus, you've got jet skis that like to take shelter off Lazarus when the sea is rough. So it's a case of very limited space, plenty of boaters, especially over the weekend. So how do we operate and how do we relate to each other? it's got to build up very slowly with mutual respect and get the mariners to put in peer pressure. And every time an incident happens, self-regulate, rather than depend on a government body or an association to burden you with more rules and regulations. Because I really feel that only boaters understand boaters. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Again, so we're hearing self-regulation is the way to go. We need to leverage on the clubs, the marinas, the associations, where boaters congregate to spread that message before the government does something about it, right? So let's help ourselves keep boating enjoyable. This is a very interesting question. I mean, something that came up in the news actually. People are asking about the blue barrels over at Sentosa. First question: do you know who owns those blue barrels? Oh, okay, so some people got the right answer. A lot of people call the MPA and then complain about the blue barrel, but actually not theirs. Yeah. So maybe we'll let Desmond from the PCG explain a little bit more about the blue barrels and sometimes are they really a safety hazard? Thank you.
Okay. For the blue barrels from Police Coast Guard, we call them the floating sea barriers or FSB. This is actually part of our overall maritime security defense, where we harden certain vulnerable coastlines with these FSBs, actually to prevent small craft threats from landing on our shores. But we are not looking at basically fencing up the whole of Singapore. It's not possible to do that. Our waters are very busy. So there are certain stretches that we have made actually very conscious safety as well as security considerations to put in place those FSBs. I know Sentosa used to be one of the hot topic about why are there so many floating sea barriers around the island. This is really because of the risk. The risk assessment that we have made, and these are areas where we place which actually do not get in the way of any maritime traffic. So this is actually done in conjunction with MPA as well, consulting where we can place them, and we actually have proper navigation marks there put in place to indicate their locations. As of today, I think largely the incidents that we see involving our FSB largely involve the non-motorized communities, which are the kayakers, because they like to kayak close to some of these barriers, and when they capsize, their kayaks get stuck at our barriers. So we are actually reaching out with this community. In fact, we have actually come out with some infographics to share with them. Recently, I met up with the Singapore Paddle Club that operates at Sentosa, actually to advise their members actually to on some of the safety considerations when they are engaging in their recreational activities near our barriers. But I think on the whole, I think the consideration of having these barriers really more from the security perspective that we have decided that we have worked on it and put this in place. But at the same time, we are also reviewing with the kind of implements that could be put in place to reinforce our maritime security. So, the barriers are there now, but I wouldn't say that it will look like that way forever. There are also efforts that we're putting in place to relook at the type of design to make it safer as well as less intrusive to the recreational users. Yep.
Thank you. Richard.
I've found it very interesting seeing the Blue Boys go out there, and quite frankly, if you wanted to get ashore, you could just go around either end of the Blue Boys. I have on many occasions had to bring with my boat, pull some people off the tides have changed, and they've found that they've got a 2.5 knot tide, and they cannot paddle anymore, and they're waving and calling for help. With respect, I have never seen any of the government, MPA, police, PSA, vessels going and pulling them off. It's always been pleasure craft that are doing it. And I look at the Blue Boys, and I around Sentosa, And I shake my head because it is so easy, if you want to go inside those blue buoys and go along. I'm sure there's a very good reason for it, but I haven't seen it yet. And I hear the explanations, but I still haven't seen how effective they are. But it does cause the canoes quite a lot of trouble. I will say that they are something that they can hang on to, but I've felt very distressed youngsters hanging on there and crying and things like that before we've pulled them off. Thank you.
Desmond, you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the FSBs are 100%. It's not possible to really fence up the whole place. Some of these openings are actually deliberate because we need to facilitate, like for example, there are some access points to Sentosa itself, Sentosa Cove, so we have to leave some openings there. So it's deliberate as well as for maintenance. But from a security perspective, if an intruder is coming in from outside our waters, if they're coming at a full speed, at a wide open throttle, usually happens at night. So the barriers actually serve as a physical line to prevent a boat from beaching directly on our shores, unless they know exactly where to go for. As to why there hasn't been, there's been a lot of rescues involving our pleasure craft community. I think this is really also arising from the mode of communications that they have adopted. Many of times, these kayakers go out, they do not have means to communicate, to call for help. So actually also reaching out to some of these communities to share with them. Like for example, they could have a portable VHF to alert or to at least have a mobile. Most mobile phones now actually can go into the water. So at least to be able to call back and request for assistance. Yeah.
Just to comment on that, I have been requested by the police and by the MPA to go and pull people off from their boats, pointing out and saying, could you give that a hand? Could you go and help those people? I've also know in 115 Marina that they've been called up and asked to send out a boat to assist. And that's been, unfortunately, I don't see the director of the Marine from 115 here, but that I've been in his office and discussed this matter. So there is a certain amount of passing the buck along to the pleasure craft to do it. Now, I have got no objections whatsoever about that, but by the same token, if you tow another boat and you see a boat in distress or without engine and they are drifting and you go and tow it, you will be told by the authority that you've got no rights to tow this boat. I have had that happen to me twice, where I've been towing another boat that's been drifting down towards the Keppel Fairway, and I've been told, when I've gone around and picked them up and been towing them along, and I've said, you've got no right to tow, you've got to get somebody to tow that boat. You're not a licensed boat. Okay, so that is a fact, but I'll leave
I'd like
it
to respond to that.
Yep.
Of
We'll
course.
just let Sean have the final word because this is going to take a long answer, but go ahead, Sean.
Sure. I think most importantly is that if there's a craft in distress, if another craft were to provide assistance, we have no objection. But in terms of how the message was communicated, so perhaps we need to look into that. But I will state our position is that, again, if perhaps you see a craft in distress, you're providing assistance to them, please go ahead because safety is at stake. Yeah. I also want to address, there was this about the blue barriers. In the larger context, it's about issue is with the paddlers, and perhaps they paddle too close to the barriers. we do see an increase in number of accidents as in kayakers and perhaps canoeists requiring assistance, especially at the Puran Channel area. As you know, the current there is stronger, and perhaps during COVID-19, there is an increased number of kayaking activities whereby they don't go out as a big group, they just go out as a very small group, but they are not familiar with the waters. Perhaps they launch in Sentosa or somewhere, and Buran Channel is an area where you can see Sentosa, a good view of mainland Singapore. They go in there, and I mean, they do not deliberately paddle close to the blue barriers, but because of the current, they get themselves capsized. Of course, I thank the pleasure craft community for providing assistance. But once I'm sure MPA or PCG, once we get informed, our craft we also have the capabilities to provide assistance as well. So I think comes back to the point of communication and engagement. It is important for us to reach out to the non-motorized community to inform them of again, local knowledge, current, where are the areas where it is more dangerous. So it's very important for them to have certain level of proficiency before they go to the area. If not, it is important to have adequate safety measures in place so that I mean, if there's a craft there to provide assistance, great, but the issue is what if they are alone? Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. And I guess that conversation just now answered a couple of questions. There was someone who asked what's a local radio VHF channel for distress. As mentioned, a lot of kayakers don't carry a VHF, right? I mean, of course, we would like to make that part of your personal safety equipment, but if you can't, handphone. But coming back to the question about the channel and the phone number to call, all the marinas have been given a small sticker, right? And I think some of the associations have them as well. So please encourage your boaters, your kayakers, your SUP guys to have the sticker with them. Store the phone number for port operations safety in your phones. And just for interest, how many of you know the VHF channel? Those in MPA, keep quiet. Those not in MPA, what's the VHF channel to call for help? You got choose from 1 to 99. Come. Obviously not 77. Anyone else? Not 70, not 16? Anyone? Later got price, No. Yeah. Channel 7, yeah? Okay. So VHF channel 7, you get help from someone, yeah, okay? From Port Operations Control, they will send someone, and twice it was Richard, so that was great. And it's also good to know that from the MPA, it's okay to tow another vessel in distress. I've been towed 3 times. Fortunately, I think I've got good karma. I've broken down, stood on my bow, waved my arms a bit, and then another boat came and towed me in. So you've heard it from the MPA. It's okay to tow someone else in distress. So please keep up that spirit of seamanship, spirit of helping each other at sea, because that's how we can, get safer, get better. We have another 5 minutes in this session, so I'm asking for anyone else with your last questions to put them up into the system so we can hopefully get to them before we end. This is a very interesting question, for all of us maybe. If there was one thing that or one change that you would like to see personally for pleasure craft safety, or to improve pleasure craft safety, what do you think that would be? That could be personal or professional. We'll keep it off the record, right? So no one's going to get into trouble. But what is one thing that you think should change, or you wish could change for the betterment of pleasure craft safety? Well, for me, the best way to learn is through experience, right? So if it was for me, I would make part of the PPCDL course an emergencies lesson. Right? We bring everyone onto a boat, then we get the boat start to flood. And then we ask them, so what are you going to do? Or we set something on fire, and they say, what are you going to do? Because that's how they train us in the Navy, right? Fire simulator, flooding simulator, and we were all the better for it. I mean, fortunately, we haven't had to use that a lot for rail, but I thought that really made the Navy a lot more comfortable at sea, a lot more comfortable being alone, taking charge and thinking about safety. So if there was something I could change, would be the PPCDL syllabus to have actual emergencies. Yep, and then see who panics and quits and yeah. Okay, that's me.
I would personally like to see more organized convoys of recreational vessels leaving Singapore waters. Now, just south of us, you've got the Riau Islands, right? Batam and Bintang. You'll be shocked. They have got more than 1,000 islands to be explored. A couple of years ago, I actually sailed off 1°15, and I went to explore the islands in Indonesia, and you would be absolutely amazed at the culture there. We just sailed down about 70 nautical miles to this island called Pulau Buaya. It had a wooden jetty. Villagers were at the jetty itself. We decided to lower the dinghy and went alongside the jetty. The reception that we had on that island was amazing. The village kids will come straight up to us, hold our hands, and brought us to see the village chief, who was so warm and welcoming. It was unbelievable. And he asked us what we were doing there. We says we're just fishing. He says, okay, my guy will be your pawang for the whole day. We will bring you and show you where the tenggiris are and where the golden snappers were. Fantastic hospitality. You see, friends, Singapore is really limited. And if it would be a real shame if your boating is limited to just Singapore waters. We don't have very much to offer here, other than Lazarus and Pulau Hantu. So I would like to see the authorities, especially the ICA, help the boater venture out of Singapore waters to make the regulations a lot friendlier for the Singapore boater. Because unless you go out to sea further than beyond Singapore waters, your experience and your learning will be very limited. After all, boats are not meant or not built to stay in the marina. Boats are meant to go out to sea. Thank you.
Who was that? Roy, yeah, okay.
Okay, from my point of view, 90% of the boat in Singapore are berthed in a marina or yacht club. So I would like to encourage the mariners and yacht clubs to organize boating activities to educate them on the safety of the use of their boats. Maybe leading a flotilla around Singapore waters for those SZ or SZH, and leading beyond Singapore waters for those Singapore or any other flag pleasure craft. So from there, then the members of the boating members would gain knowledge and experience from the more experienced personnel of the mariners or the yacht club. For example, the dock master or the marina manager. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to touch on personal responsibility. That is, as the master of the boat, I think a lot of points Captain William Francis has brought up in his presentation. Again, on responsibility is, as a master, it's very important that you take care of the safety of everyone on board and also the boat. That means, you carry out, for persons on board, if you see that perhaps certain activities they are doing, there's a risk of them falling overboard, you ask them to wear a life jacket. Make sure that the entire boating trip is safe by doing proper passage planning, having the proper equipment. You have the knowledge of the local waters, comply with the rules of the roads, so that the entire trip is safe for everyone on board. With regard to the boat itself, it's important that you know the boat, where are the areas where there's a possibility that could be could result in perhaps defects and water entering the craft. Carry out regular maintenance, because we also have cases whereby the boat goes out to sea, the master is not familiar with the craft. So the boat starts to take in water. They are also not sure what to do. So it's very important that you take responsibility for everyone on board in your boat. So make sure that you're knowledgeable enough to make the trip safe before you go out. And last point is about emergency response. Like what Terence mentioned, it's very important that you know what to do. You can't anticipate any situation that can occur, but in terms of emergency response, you should know what to do, who to call, immediate actions taken, with regard to, most importantly, safety of life and then safety of craft. Thanks.
Otherwise, okay. Just very interesting question. Thank you, everyone. Very interesting question came up just now. Does the PCG undertake PAC testing, especially after incident? I don't want Desmond to answer. My answer is assume it will be done, okay? Because no matter whatever Desmond answers about blood alcohol content testing, just assume that it will be done. So please, just like when you're on the road, don't drink and drive, yeah? Okay? So that would be the answer for that. Okay, so we've come to the end. I would like to maybe open it up one last chance to the panel. Just maybe in 30 seconds or less, give us your final takeaway about pleasure craft safety, about pleasure craft boating in Singapore, what you want everyone here to take away from this session. Just one liner.
A very quick one. Experience.
Okay. Experience. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Whenever you see something wrong out in the water with a fellow boater, just remind him with these 3 words: PEL, observance of good seamanship. Knock it down until they realize that it all boils down to common sense. Observance of good seamanship. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to encourage anyone who has passed the PPSDL to remember the rules and the voyage system and all that. In our growing up years, when we pass the exam, we just throw away the books. But for PPSDL, that knowledge is useful if you want to continue boating. Yeah. Thank you.
I think for everyone that is like myself, that is sailing actively be it for work or for pleasure, I think really to respect the sea. Something that what you see calm is at the moment will be very different the next hour or so. So really to respect the sea at all times.
Well, in addition to what I've mentioned earlier, for craft, that I think there's some discussion about craft going out of Singapore port limits. For those who are going out, do register your passage plan with us. Do register your passage plan with MPA so that we know where you're going. Yep.
Thank you. And on my part, I would like to leave you all with 3 lines that a very wise senior officer shared with me when I was in the Navy. As a captain, right? Always look ahead. Look ahead for safety, look ahead for issues. Always take charge because you're the skipper, right? You're the only one that everyone's going to look up to. And of course, always think safety. Yep. And then you'll have a good day at sea. Yep. Even though the weather's not playing ball. So on that note, I'd like to thank our panel. I'd like to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for being a part of this lively discussion. And I look forward to meeting all of you behind over at the networking session where we can share more stories, especially off the record, right? Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Big round of applause for our panelists.